Today our iScore RC seminar series is best practices in working with contract research organizations. So thank you for joining us today. A couple different things we have our panelists. So first of all, who's going to be facilitating today is Shelley Welch. She is our director of iScore RC. Then we have Aminia Garvey. She's the Senior Director for Global Feasibility Site Engagement at Elucent. She has over 25 years experience in clinical research. She has been involved in numerous projects that integrate healthcare and technology, such as, now I'm just going to read this to you, EHR2EDC. She might tell us what that means when she gives her introduction. Her expertise lies in site selection strategy, investigator identification, and investigator relationship management. Beyond her professional responsibilities, she is deeply committed to promoting diversity in all aspects of clinical trials. She actively supports initiatives aimed at increasing diversity among principal investigators, research sites, study staff, and patient recruitment efforts. She serves as a board of directors, on the board of directors, for Innova. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to preparing young women for STEM careers. Additionally, she contributes her expertise as an advisory board member of the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and her master's degree in science from Ulster University in Georgetown, Northern Ireland. Matt Schoenwalder is from 1999 to 2014. He accrued deep industry expertise working in data management, clinical project management with a focus in gastroenterology, and clinical trial feasibility. He has broad clinical trials operations experiences spanning multiple functional services and therapeutic areas. And Matt adds holistic perspective and operations to Pharma Array's existing biometric subject matter expertise. And then we have Jane Pritchard. She's our senior grants accountant for the WVCTSI Clinical Trials Center of Excellence, where she is responsible for the development and negotiation of the industry clinical trial budgets. In addition, she manages post-awards finances for greater than 75 studies across multiple therapeutic areas. Jane's 39-year experience career spans a variety of roles, including research technician in both academic and pharmaceutical laboratories, administrative study coordinator, a CRO clinical trial monitor, and project manager. And she's also a member of the Association of Clinical Research Professionals and is accredited as an ACRP project manager and is a certified clinical research associate. All right. So with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing just so we can see everyone. And then I'm going to pass it over to Shelley Welch to start the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. And for those that don't know me, I am the director of iScore RC and wear that hat overseeing the coordinator development program. But I also have another role managing the Center of Excellence that is in the CTSI. And I've been with CTSI for a little over 7 years. I'm a nurse by background. And prior to coming to CTSI, I worked for a CRO. So I guess I'm the appropriate person to lead this panel and look forward to the discussion today. So let's just jump in. And I guess my first discussion point and question is not a question, really. Just tell us about your current and past roles with CROs, just so we understand a little bit about your perspective. And I'll start with Matt, because you're first on my Hollywood square there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I started in the industry in 1999, straight out of graduate school with the applicable, and I also am a Tar Heel, both undergrad and grad school, a biochem undergrad, and then I got my master's actually in environmental science and engineering with a focus in environmental health. So, focused in kind of toxicology, environmental toxins, they're all chemicals, right? Whether it's pharmaceuticals or toxins, if you want, depending on your stance and how you're looking at it. But I started into the CRO industry in 1999. My first role, I'm going to date myself hugely here, was I was an expert over fax-based data collection technology. So data management back when people could actually fill out a form and fax it in, and we had stuff that would all read it, right? Optical character recognition. Yeah, just before EDC, a couple of years before EDC came along. So I was a project manager for sort of reduced services studies with a focus on that technology then. I was in data management for several years, and then I came to the epiphany that I wanted to be a jack of all trades, master of some in the CRO world, and wanted to bounce around and into as many kind of departments and functions as possible. Moved into project management, worked my way kind of up through the titles on the ladder of project management, as stated earlier, with a primary focus in GI, largely Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, a little bit of IBS. And then I dabbled in asthma stuff as well, because we were studying monoclonal antibodies were the big hot thing then in the mid 2000s, and everyone had one, and dabbled in RA too. So I was in project management for a good while. When I sat in that department, though, and I was kind of the North American head of PM for GI, I didn't like the data that I had been getting from our feasibility team in trying to put together proposals and strategies for new work. And so I started building tools myself to do, if this means anything to anyone, Monte Carlo simulations, and so I started building tools to do that, really kind of in the mid 2000s, when it was not really done that way. It eventually took hold and others started doing that way. It's kind of my little claim to fame in the background, which then led me over into feasibility. And I ran the feasibility group there at Quintiles for a little while, using those technologies. From there, I moved over to Icon. And when I went to Icon, it was one of the most creative opportunities I had, because I was handed 3 small departments and told, tell us what else we need to do and just come back in 3 months with a proposal. So I ended up having this ragtag of 7 different departments underneath me, from some project specialists supporting project managers, to the technology group, the implementing technologies like CTMS and things like this in the background, to a specific team that focused on supporting some of our biggest clients, to a group that stood up new partnerships with new clients and developed operating manuals and governance structures and things like that, but did it in a more organized kind of way. ETMF had that group too. After that, I became the head of North American Clinical Operations for Icon. So all those CRAs, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that have come out to visit your sites were under my remit there. That was my final position at Icon. And then at the end of 2022, I got to a point in life where there was an opportunity. My wife, by the way, is also in the industry. We met very early in our careers. She is a biostatistical programmer by training and has a wide network in the biostats world. And so we partnered up, and we now run our own company, PharmArray, where we focus in biostats programming, dabble in some medical writing stuff, but it's largely kind of, if anybody knows, an FSP or a functional service provider model. So we have got a few small biotech and CRO clients who we serve now. So that is me, and I'll stop there.
That is very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. I appreciate the years of experience for sure. Alminia.
Not quite sure how I follow that, but I will say, and this might be relevant for this audience, I actually started my career at Duke Clinical Research Institute, so an ARO, and I worked there for a while in a number of different areas, but then I went into investigator relations, and like Matt, realized that the data just wasn't right. So really kind of focused and worked on a lot of data cleaning and trying to make sure that we understood, what we were hearing from our sites. From there, I went to Parexel and worked in feasibility. And So my mother-in-law would disagree, but I find nagging works sometimes. So I started nagging people above me about, why are we sending the feasibilities to the same sites over and over again? We have a lot of this information already. Why don't we use the information we have? Why are we going to the same sites over and over again and not making them like preferred sites and making them, making them feel special and want to work with us? So the nagging worked, and we developed the Site Alliance program at ParExcel. So I did that for a number of years. And then my boss from there went to ICON and said, hey, could you come over to ICON? We need a Site Alliance program. So I went to ICON and developed their health, I think there's healthcare alliances. Did that for a while, moved back to the site side for a little while with Accelicare, one of the sites that we had acquired, and worked for OncoCare. And recently just joined Elucid to start up their Site Alliance program. So we are developing preferred site networks and globally. And again, really trying to make sure that we're using the information that we have, that we are being sort of the CRO of choice for sites by making it easier for sites to work with us, and also to cut out a lot of the things that we do traditionally because we've always done it and not because we really see any value. So when we get down to the question about feasibility questionnaires, I'll have a lot to say.
I'll ask you first. You'll go first on that one.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Very interesting experience as well. Jane, last but not least.
Last but not least.
Yeah.
Well, so 39 years, it seems hard to believe that I've been working in research for 39 years, but I have. And 26 of that was spent between CRO and pharma. The other 13 were more academic roles or government roles, and I include my current role in the academic category.
Mm-hmm.
While I was working at CROs and pharma, I had various roles. Starting in the lab, I seem to like the details and being down in the weeds. Worked as a lab tech in a pharmaceutical lab, worked as a lab tech in academic lab. But CRO, pharmaceutical laboratory work is a whole different creature, but it's very interesting from the perspective of you're actually at the bench, and you get to meet some chemicals, as Matt referred to them, up close and personal. In 99, well, actually, let's go back to 97. 97, I took a study coordinator role with a dermatologist at Duke University. We all have this RTP connection, it sounds like. Not surprising, given the number of CROs that are there.
Sure.
And I was doing her budgets and her IRB submissions for her clinical trials unit, which was about maybe 25, 30 studies at a time, more or less. And that was really eye-opening to me. I had come to the conclusion that I really wanted to move over to clinical research after having worked in the pharmaceutical land. And I applied for a CRA job, and by Jove, I got it. And so I worked as a CRA for Pharma Research Corporation, which was a small niche CRO that primarily dealt with HIV studies and oncology studies. And thus I started, flying all over the East Coast and going to lots of sites. Lived through 9/11 during that time, which was rather interesting. And then ended up moving to a clinical research scientist position within pharmaceutical company at GSK. Worked on a HIV CCR5 inhibitor that started out looking really good and then crashed and burned. But that's the way product development goes. But over the course of my career, I've worked in all phases of study. And now I'm with WVCTSI doing finance. So go figure. It's I once told on an interview, I said, math, I can add grams or I can add dollars. It doesn't matter. The math is the same.
Yeah, that's true. True. Thank you, Jane. maybe we should have put the second question first, but just so that we're on a level set, one of you, I'm not going to pick on just one person, but tell me and make sure we understand what the role of the CRO is. Because I probably have my perspective, but one of you, if you would, please, just so we can level set for those that are new to research, what the role of the CRO is.
Sure, I guess I can start and I'll let Armenia and Jane jump in. So effectively what a CRO is it's an organization that can and does do pretty much every facet of the management and execution, short of being a site, although those lines can now get blurred sometimes too when CROs own sites or networks. But they don't own the asset. That's kind of the important part. Although I will say, even then, I have seen novel situations where there has been a time in the past when Quintiles had a kind of a side group that would co-invest in assets, but that's kind of rare, and I would put that to the side. The general rule of thumb is they don't own the asset. They don't own the IP that's being tested, but they are a partner then, is the way CROs like to look at it. Sometimes pharma likes to look at it more slave-like, quite frankly, sometimes, depending on the company that you're talking to.
Master slave, yes.
Yeah. But a partner then to the pharmaceutical companies to help from anything from the very beginnings of the question of what indication to deploy an asset into, and maybe even help develop protocol along the way. CROs will often have groups that will help with that, all the way through late phase outcomes, observational style trials way on the back end, and everything you can imagine in between, from lab services, imaging services, project management services, data management. We've mentioned a bunch of them actually in our introductions. So they are really there as a service to pharma companies. But one thing I think is pertinent to our discussion now is that increasingly over the last decade, I think CROs are kind of awakening to the fact that just as much as pharma companies, they might pay the bills and they're the customer, sites are also a customer to them as well. Not everybody in the CRO world has that top of mind, but they certainly should, and there's at least been some evolution in that direction. I'll stop and let others chime in.
Well, I would say, I mean, listening to you talk, that is certainly accurate, and it just for the audience too, sponsors can pick and choose what services, and they are contractually obligated to those services. So not every sponsor, at least in my experience, gives you the whole project. Sometimes it's very specific, and so it makes sites, if you don't understand that relationship, and maybe you should ask when you start to work with a CRO exactly what portion of the project is going to be managed by the CRO. I think that's helpful. And then my other question kind of related to that, and I'll let others chime in. Do they have the same responsibilities as a sponsor?
Yes, they do. From a regulatory perspective, they are the sponsor. I mean, they're assuming there's a transfer of those responsibilities as a result of the contractual agreement. So, they are acting as the sponsor regardless of what service lines that they're responsible for, but only for those service lines. Yeah. So, for example, if a CRO has a clinical monitoring responsibility, then clinical monitoring, they are functioning as the sponsor in that role.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. You have any, Jane, you want to?
I was just going to say one more thing, and that is, I think it is very helpful to understand that, to sort of break down what the various service lines are, because there's quite a few, and they range from everything from regulatory to site payments, site ID, clinical monitoring, clinical management, pharmacovigilance, biostats, feasibility, medical monitoring. I mean, it all is diced up, and they sort of pick and choose what they want you to do.
Yeah, and in addition, another important thing to understand is the CRO can then contract some of those services out. Because most CROs don't have everything in-house. So you've got relationships, you know, that are pretty complex. And it's helpful for a site to understand those relationships and responsibilities. Just my thoughts. Let's go to the next question. What's the best way for a site to engage with a CRO that there is no or very limited past working relationship?
I can.
Jane, you're off mute, or Alminia? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to jump in here just because I developed quite a few. So the
Yeah.
first place I would start with any member who has site in their title. So site engagement, site alliances, site support, you know, these, our teams are looking for sites. We're looking for good sites. And as we know, protocols are becoming more and more complex. So we're really looking, so it's like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes, trying to find the sites that have the interest, the experience, and the capabilities to do the studies that we're looking for. So I definitely would look there. You can also find those sort of titles on LinkedIn. I would also look at any networking events, any conferences. Normally now, if you go to several conferences, they'll even have like stands in the exhibit hall looking for a site. So really, you know, come prepared with information about your site, because normally we're thinking about a specific or several specific studies, but that's the best way to engage someone at the CRO.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And a lot of that can be found on LinkedIn by looking for site identification, feasibility, specialist, just as she said. The other thought I have is that, you know, a lot of pharmaceutical companies still will go to a CRO and say, here's the sites that we want. Yeah, you can smatter some of your own in there too, you know, and there's this kind of back and forth on that. So you can also get there by going through the pharma link. You know, if you know of a protocol that's out there that you're interested in, and maybe you see it on CT.gov or you're doing it, you come across in your own research, and if you're able to find out who at pharma is going to be working on those projects, sometimes it might be listed, sometimes it's not. Use connections. You could get your name on there and then fed to the CRO, right? That would be probably more successful through kind of smaller biotech companies that don't have much of a team. It's easier to find somebody there, and they're more reliant on, they'll often go to a CRO and say, here are 2 key opinion leaders that we definitely want, and maybe this person because they're my brother's uncles, whatever, and then you can come up with the entire rest. Well, if you could be on that list, the CRO will listen.
And I will say that the sponsors also have their sort of site engagement teams as well. I know Sanofi has and Takeda has it. So I would definitely tap into those as well, because again, like as Matt said, they will hand the CRO the list saying, we want you to use these sites for this study.
else, yeah, for sure. Jane, anything to add?
I think that they covered it quite well, actually.
Okay, awesome. I think so as well. What makes a site attractive to a CRO?
Patient population.
Patient population. Having those sick patients, but let's not make them too sick. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. Not too sick. Certainly, there's always inclusion and exclusion criteria to take into consideration. Yes. But patient population goes a huge distance. More and more, I think that there is a huge emphasis on having some experience in doing clinical trials. I mean, they want to see that they want to see your metrics. How long does it take you to get a budget prepared? How long does it take? How long does it take to get through IRB approvals? And you know, back in the days of the horse and carriage, when I first started, we were still mostly working with local IRBs. And now, of course, I think that we've shifted a lot more towards central IRBs, but you know, that's still is a factor. Having a good, having site SOPs, so having solid training programs in place to ensure that the folks that are going to be running the study actually have the training to know what they're supposed to do in ICH GCP. I had this flash there a minute ago that when I was doing my introduction, I completely left out the 12 years while I was at IQVIA Quintiles as a project manager. Say no more. But yes, I really was there doing that for 12 years. So that's a start. I'll let others chime in.
Well, I'll go next because I think Almenia, you probably have the latest and greatest take on this, more recent than I do. So, maybe I'll cover a couple basics and then hand over to you. But, certainly the metrics Jane was referring to, that anything you can think could be measured is measured, right? So of course, your screening and randomization rates of patients on previous trials, your site ID form, your CIF turnaround time, when was it sent? When did they get it back? The CDA, when was it sent? When did they get it back? Your RegPack cycle time, your contract negotiation cycle time, your IRB cycle times, anything that there's a cycle time is measured. But that's assuming that there is history. Certainly a huge one also is a quality red flag, right? So the sites, and I could tell horror stories, as many of you probably can too, the sites who have had a very significant quality event happen do get red flagged in the CRO's database to never work with again. And that can be contentious if a pharma comes and says, this is who we want to work with, and we go, I'm not so sure you do. You can imagine that can sometimes be fireworks. And this kind of steps back into feasibility and patient availability, a lot of people yes, sites need to have it, but it's not as simple as prevalence and incidence in the region, right? It used to be that CROs would look at that kind of first, but eventually they started realizing, but what the site networks look like, not networks like Almenia works in, but what they how they can perform and how patients flow through the system is probably more important. So in the GI world, for instance, for a long time there, sure, prevalence of Crohn's and colitis in Eastern Europe is not very high outside of certain Jewish populations. However, if you're going in there with a monoclonal antibody, at the time there were only 2 sites who could store and administer such a drug. So they had a huge throughput of patients. And so those sites were very, very attractive in spite of some of the other data. I'll hand it over after that.
Well, I mean, I think you're right with all of the timelines. And so when the site is activated, how long did it take to screen the first patient, enroll the first patient, every step of the patient pathway. Then we're looking at data queries. We're looking at data entry and timelines. So anything that's done, especially now in this electronic age. Back to my introduction, EHR to the EDC was actually an initiative to move data directly from the patient's record into the EDC system, hoping to make it easier for sites not to have data entry this and making sure that the data is aligned. But it goes back to other things that we're looking for. We're looking for sites that have access to EDC. We're looking for sites that have access to diverse patient populations, which is becoming more and more important every day. There is a new FDA guidance on the diversity action plans done on the 24th. We're also looking for sites that can, although there aren't a lot of studies now, but can do some form of decentralized clinical trials. We're also looking for sites that, one of the things that we run into with sites sometimes is that they're up and running for a study. We have a patient, but that hospital can't take the patient because they're not on their network, or that hospital can't take the patient because the patient doesn't have insurance. So we're looking for patient pathways and sites that can accept patients from maybe outside of their network as well.
Interesting perspective. Quick question that's not on the script, but I thought about it when you guys were talking. Does every CRO have a database that they manage the sites in? I would assume so, but
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we did.
Yeah. Most of it is baked into the configurations of their CTMS systems.
Uh-huh.
But there are some who have others, side databases that link into that as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I figured as much. All right. So once a site finishes a study, what are ways to keep the communication channels open? Who's off of mute? Almina is off mute.
So
What do you think?
Yeah, so for me, any updates that the site may have, sometimes people will say, "Oh, Almenia, we just brought in a new doctor and he's interested in these types of studies, or he has this kind of experience. We just opened a new unit, or have a satellite hospital." Any new information is helpful. Also, if there are things that are information that they've developed, that they can say, "Hey, do you know what, we worked in this study in these indications that are not our studies," so not breaking any confidentiality, but just letting us know, "We've worked on obesity studies, we've done some of these NASH and MASH studies," because that's the kind of thing that we might not be looking at your site at that time for those types of studies, but then when we hear from you, it's like, "Oh, you know what, I didn't even realize that they can do this, and so let me send them a feasibility questionnaire."
Gotcha. Okay.
I would think that doctor to doctor conference conversations and sort of understanding, the general medical networking network, that's redundant, would be a key way that, they continue to pass information back and forth.
Yeah, well, and of course, when the study is over, you then have the period of the analysis going forward, and eventually you're going to have study results that needs to get shared back out to the PIs, and so there may be opportunities to capitalize in connections there. But it really does come to traditional networking and developing relationships largely. You cannot. It would be a mistake to think that the SIFs alone, that you fill out are somehow meaningful, because the truth of the matter is that those forms that sometimes you have to fill out the same thing a million times unless somebody has fixed it, and some CROs are still doing that, sadly. That's something that pharma largely makes CROs do. CROs have been trying to get rid of that for at least 2 decades and have struggled to do it because it's so embedded in the pharma mindset.
Right.
And however, from a site ID perspective, we would get those forms in, and the general rule of thumb is the question of how many patients are you going to enroll. You cut it either in half or you take a third of it. That was always the
That
rule
was
when
always
we were
my
modeling it
strategy.
out.
Every time I talk to a PI, so I do it at a site. When a PI says they can enroll 50, we might change the feasibility to, definitely, if I can't talk them down from that number.
Yeah.
I mean, every PI
It's
is
crazy, but
over ambitious.
But if you have performed, well on a study, and if you are able to create a relationship and a connection, particularly to the CTM and the PM of the study, they will remember you. And they might go on to some other CRO, but they're probably going to stay in the same indication space.
Yeah.
And they will add you onto the list if they have an opportunity. So those personal connections, just like everywhere in life, are absolutely critical. And it's something, of course, in today's day and age, we're all starting to lose sight of.
Yep.
And I like to dovetail that with inviting us to seminars like this, webinars, clinical trials, International Clinical Trials Day. We're always invited, or often invited, to functions that the sites are having to have a table to talk to connect with the PIs and connect with the hospitals. Anytime that you can extend an invitation, even if the person from the CRO or pharmaceutical company cannot make it, they have that invitation, they have that name. It's a nice reminder.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's interesting perspective. We have a number of academic medical centers, that we partner with. So what are ways the academic centers can remain relevant for CROs?
Well, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is, those of us who've been a CRO for a long time, when we hear academic centers, we think of long cycle times, long startup times. And you're always going to have one or two, because that's often where the key opinion leaders are.
Right.
And you want those names attached, and often they are the ones who were consulted on the protocol design, right? And so you really need those folks involved. However, when you do your planning, you basically assume no enrollment whatsoever, and that it's all
None.
from often
None. Yeah.
often none.
Yeah.
Or at least very
Still-
small numbers compared
Yeah.
to others.
Yeah.
So, the way to be relevant in the eyes of the CRO are either be a very well-known key opinion leader
Okay.
or perform just as well as the private sites, in terms of the IRB review timelines. Your local IRB has got to be quick. I'm not saying you have to match every central IRB, but they have to be pretty darn close.
Mhm.
And then maybe you out enroll them in terms of high quality patients.
Mhm.
You would absolutely be just as relevant as any other site if those things were done.
Okay. Interesting. Jane or Amelia?
I just wanted to add, again, echo what Matt was saying, is that, it's the timelines. The reason everything is pushing the timelines is because, of course, the more time you have open, hopefully the more patients you can enroll. So it's all about delivery and patient enrollment. And the reason why we oftentimes, unfortunately, try to avoid academic sites is, one, there's the contracting. And sometimes we have issues where the site has, like, they need to publish, and we can't give a hospital or a PI the ability to publish for a pharmaceutical company. So indemnity, there's certain things that come up in the contracting. So anytime you can use a model contract, that helps facilitate things. Or if we know these things in advance, these are things that we can say, okay, this hospital has these regulations they have to use. We need to go ahead and start with those and then work our way from there. Here's language we used on a previous study that helped. Those things will help with academic hospitals.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to jump into, we've touched about it. We talked about retention rate and accrual rates being important. Are there other specific metrics that you'd like to mention that a site should track? We talked about IRB, startup times, contract times. Are there others that we're missing?
Just a few. So CDAs, having those turned around relatively quickly. The feasibility question, and now this is me beating my own drum, the feasibility questionnaire.
Yeah, right,
It's
sure.
really helpful to have that. And then one thing we do find often, just the initial, yes, we're interested, or no, we're not interested. Sometimes for some centers takes a long time because they have to go through a protocol review, or they have to select a PI. And so, just the communication timelines as well.
Yeah, when you get those questionnaires back, most of the time you're not going to find major red flags on there that go, oh my gosh, I'm not going to go with this site. Most of the time we're checking a box and going through a process. But one critical angle is, because, as Amini was saying, time is of the essence. There's often an element of first come, first serve. Right. So, if you delay getting those questionnaires back, if you take 31 days, you're probably not going to make the list.
Yeah.
But if you get back in 10 days with the exact same answers, you very likely will.
Yeah. Very good perspective. So what are the items the CRO is looking for from a site feasibility questionnaire? And are there additional documents that we could provide that would be make you more attractive to a CRO? I mean, I think you wanted to take this.
So yes, a couple of things that are really helpful. And for the documentation, I'll answer that first. Sometimes sites provide us with this. This is our internal process. We have to go through this committee, this protocol review. So we know when we're working with you that this is the startup timelines or the lead-in time, so that we can start addressing those timelines early. Also, for the feasibility questionnaire, it's important for us to really look at the access to patients. That's, I think, for us, like the most important thing, and to see how we can get through to the patients really quickly. And then for the feasibility questionnaire, also, I wanted to say is that we are really actively trying to reduce our questionnaires. We know that in the past, these questionnaires had 80, 100 questions on it. They wanted to know if you had internet access, even though they emailed you the feasibility questionnaire. I mean, these sort of things. And you'll see we're trying to, one is to delete information. So really just have that information. Do you have the interest, the experience, and the capacity to do the study and access to the patients? And then the other things will come later, because you know what, if you don't have a centrifuge, I bet you if you have the patients, we'll get you a centrifuge. We'll find one somewhere and get it to you. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. The other thing that we're trying to do is use the information that you've already provided for us, so that when you receive these feasibility questionnaires, some of the information is pre-populated and you'll just have to go through and say, yes, this is still current, this is still correct. But we are trying that as well. It's a little bit challenging if you move and say, oh, maybe not Dr. Brown, Dr. Jones is better, but we're still working through those sort of things just to ensure that for the feasibility questionnaires, they're very, very focused and concise, and hopefully will take a lot less time for you guys to fill out.
Okay.
So, I'm going to maybe diverge ever so slightly here. We often, the industry has always sort of mushed together what I might call true feasibility and site identification, right? And even during this conversation, we've been mushing it together a little bit. I do think it's an important distinction to make, that there is feasibility and what you really mean is some element of site ID, and you're testing the feasibility of the timeline of execution. And then there is feasibility in terms of the feasibility of the protocol itself being successful, right? And so you may often find opportunities, and certainly I've been a part of many of these, I'm sure many of you have, where earlier in the protocol development, pre-FDA approval most often, you might find opportunities to work with a CRO and or pharma and have discussion groups. I've certainly seen these kind of an ongoing online discussion groups, not happening all at one time, but it's kind of an open dialogue that can happen with a set of PIs saying, well, I think this inclusion criteria is going to make it extra tricky. You're not going to hit the enrollment rates you want because that's cutting out too many patients with that particular lab value, whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
If you show a certain level of engagement and enthusiasm during an opportunity like that, that's also going to be sticky in the minds of CROs downstream for future opportunities. As we all know, there are all kinds of Me Too drugs out there that just aren't all that exciting, and you don't think it's going to be much better than standard of care, right? But if you are engaged and excited about a particular, asset, drug, treatment, and you have an opportunity to show it through that level of engagement, that'll go a really long way.
Okay. Last, before we open it up to questions from the participants, can you share a challenging situation that you've had with a site and how you resolved it? Not disclosing any site names, of course, or PIs.
Oh, gosh.
Yes, I mean, where to start?
So many.
The worst one.
I'll start you off on this one. I was working, it was when I was at Quintiles, I was in a, I will divulge that, but I was in an unblinded CPM role. And I had a site in an undisclosed country where their pharmacy was, they decided they were going to renovate the pharmacy. And of course, they didn't mention that to us up front so that there could be some guidance on how to go about, moving IP, that sort of thing. And so I got a phone call that the monitor was there and the IP had been moved into a refrigerator into a men's bathroom.
Okay.
And
Nice.
admittedly, it was locked, but keys were given out.
Okay.
And so the long and short of it was there was a long CAPA process that we went through to correct that. And CAPA stands for Corrective and Preventative Action plan and the QC folks love those, and we all love those because they help getting sites back on the rails if they have went off.
Yep.
And so that the long and the short of it was, cold chain custody, how they were documenting what was happening. We had to replace the IP, which is of course expensive. CROs don't like that. It was a QC flag, didn't like that, but we did get them back in place. But that's one of my more remarkable stories.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'll just hit briefly on two. I mean, we had a site. Of course, they were in Miami, which is kind of the Wild West of sites. And you see you nodding your head. I think they had 15, 16 completely made up fraudulent patients.
Oh,
That was a joy to deal with, working with the sponsor and the FDA to clean up and reopen enrollment elsewhere. And there's fixing the trial, but then there's all the other stuff that comes with it. But so that was a joy. And then the second one was I was running a study one time that had a large Latin American component, and we had probably the biggest known kind of KOL in this space in LATAM come to us and starting demanding more money per patient in the middle of the trial. And this person had their reasons, but they told us if we did not do it, that they would go to every other PI in LATAM and tell them to stop enrolling on our study, effectively shutting it down there. So it's a little bit of blackmail going on. That was a good time.
a little blackmail. Wow. Armenia.
Well, mine wasn't actually the site's fault, but we started this asthma study. And on the first day, we were all excited because we had like 3 or 4 patients enrolled like immediately. And then somebody noticed that that all of the patients had the same initials. And all the patients had the same birthday. And this kept happening. Well, what we were having were these patients that were going from site to site to site in the same area and joining the frequent flyers, I guess we call it. So yeah, that wasn't ideal.
Yeah, it was not.
Which is more common than anyone likes to believe, particularly in the psych therapeutic area.
And
We were
then
just
phase 1 space too.
phase.
Mhm.
I didn't do phase 1, but yes, I've heard that is the case. Thank you all. Do we have questions from the audience? Debbie, do we have questions?
There's no questions in the chat yet. You have been muted upon entry, so you're more than welcome to unmute yourself. You can place your question in the chat to everyone, or you're more than welcome to send it anonymously to Debbie Lee, and I will not divulge your name if you have a question you'd like to ask our panelist. The quiet group.
Well, I have one.
Okay.
I'm still thinking, because Matt, while you were talking about the fraudulent patients, how did you catch it?
Well, a darn good CRA actually spotted that the patient's signatures looked suspiciously similar on the handwritings. Sadly, there's no really good, computerized way to detect that. And I would say that many CRAs today aren't even necessarily trained or given the time to dive in that as deeply. I'm not as convinced that it would be as easily caught today as it was then, which was probably 15 years ago.
Right, because we have digital signatures, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's how it was caught.
Okay.
It all unraveled.
Okay. And Armenia, you monitored that in your EDC?
Yeah, they were looking at the EDC system for the patients, and that's where they saw the initials and the birth date, and the weight was within 5 pounds.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
Interesting.
I did have an instance of a PI who lost their license because of a DUI situation. I don't know. I didn't know all the details. And that turned quite ugly rather quickly in terms of, determining if this person was going to be able to be relicensed, reporting up to the sponsor, getting the sub-I into the PI role.
Mhm.
This is not a site horror story, but it actually does play into your question about, our CROs, just as responsible as pharma. I was running a trial many years ago. It was ulcerative colitis, and we had a patient in Germany who was diagnosed and hospitalized with toxic megacolon. Okay, you don't need to know what that is to know it sounds bad.
Yeah, you're right.
And this SAE came into us. Of course, we're acting quickly, and the sponsor came to us and said, "Wait, you are not allowed to report that to regulatory authorities." And we were like, "What?" And they said, "Well, per the protocol, exacerbation of underlying disease does not qualify as an AE. So if it's not an AE, it can't be an SAE. And this is exacerbation of the existing ulcerative colitis." Now, I had 2 gastroenterologists as part of my team. Their one medic, because this is a small biotech company, is in pediatrics, actually. And it was kind of a bit of a war. I mean, I brought in our chief medical officer, and to make the point of, look, number one, if a site says something is an SAE, you treat it as an SAE no matter what. Period. End of story.
Mhm.
Right. Number two, I've got these 2 gastroenterologists saying, no, although there is a relation and certainly a higher probability of having toxic megacolon if you have one of these diseases, it is not the same as a flare-up, right?
Right.
And we said, we're reporting it, period. I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
It spoiled the relationship with them,
Did it?
but it was the
Yeah.
right thing to do, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Any questions? Any other questions?
Oh, go right ahead, Tara Riddle.
Hi, I don't necessarily have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation today. It's been very interesting listening to you all. I'm at WVCTSI now, but I'm a former CRO person as well. And I feel your pain with all these issues that you are, sometimes I worked at the same CRO with Shelley previously, and Debbie and a couple others on the call. So, we definitely know at times you and your team feel like you've been at war. And there's some traumatic responses. So, it's been nice hearing from you all and your perspective. So, just wanted to say thank you again.
Thanks,
Thank
Tara.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bringing back some memories.
I literally laughed out loud when Matt compared
Yeah.
or the relationship with some of the sponsors.
Debbie, did you
Yeah.
say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to also say thank you to our panelists and also to our facilitator today. So I greatly appreciate that. Just wanted to let you know about some upcoming events for iScore. So we do have Journal Club on July 17th from 4 to 5. If you need that, if you don't already have that on your calendar as an iScore team member, feel free to reach out to Austin. Our next seminar series will be a demonstration on Encore at West Virginia University. That will be happening on July 31st from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And I am throwing into the chat right now the RSVP for that. So feel free to go ahead and register for that. We have Anya Slavin, who's our regulatory systems administrator. She's also on the call today. She'll be giving that demonstration of how we use Encore. So with that, thank you everyone so much for your time. If you have any other questions or anything, feel free to reach out to us. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye. Nice to meet you, Almenia.
Thank you. Nice meeting you as well.
Thank you.